The file begins. A winter morning, 2026. The gray sky over Norfolk promised nothing but a premonition of endings. On the day most subjects prepared to celebrate another, the sixth decade with a little to spare, the Duke's years of life, not a congratulatory card, but a punitive system, approached his threshold. Arrest. A word that for a member of the royal family seemed to have been erased from the lexicon since the 17th century. But not for this man. The accusation, wrapped in bureaucratic language, spoke of abuse of trust, of confidential documents become currency in another, far darker economy. Pause. The anatomy of a fall. It began not in this hour. A year ago, in the autumn of 2025, the gilding of titles was already flaking away, leaving only the naked, vulnerable flesh of the surname. The king showed no leniency. And now, as the steel doors of the service car slammed shut, it became clear. Royal Lodge, once a fortress, would become a museum of his mistakes, or a mausoleum. The emptiness within these walls was felt long before they became vacant. An autopsy was due, and it promised to be long and painful. Wreckage of an empire. News of the arrest did not just pierce the airwaves, it detonated them. Every tabloid, every news portal savored the details, shuffling old accusations with new facts. Public opinion, once divided, now froze in unanimous judgment. The relentless mechanism of the media meat grinder worked at full capacity, grinding the remnants of former reputation into dust. Everything that was once part of his privileged world, from official receptions to closed-door meetings, was now scrutinized under a microscope. And each time, something new was found. Or rather, something that had been convenient to ignore before. The royal family, represented by its head, made an unprecedented gesture. Complete openness. Access to all archives. It was not a gesture of support, but an act of severance. A surgical operation to remove a tumor threatening the entire organism. Shadows of the past, those very unflattering images, long circulated in the semi-darkness of rumors, now gained clarity. They were published, commented on, analyzed. The symbol of power, once shining on the front stage, turned into an object for study, an anatomical exhibit. His fall was not just a personal tragedy, it was a lesson. Cold, merciless. That even walls of ancient stone cannot hide from the truth when it decides to emerge into the light. And that from here on out, it will be pause, only worse. Only worse. The palace walls couldn't hide what had been, yet they remembered him before the rot set in. A prince. Born into velvet and stone, his arrival was a gilded promise. The second son, shielded from the ultimate burden of the crown, yet steeped in its tradition. Education, Naval College. A career forged not in the shadow of Westminster, but in the brine and steel of the Royal Navy. He was a pilot, a hero of the Falklands, navigating danger with a quiet, almost arrogant competence. The public saw a dashing figure, a man of action, a future. His smile, they said, was genuine, his handshake firm. He moved through the gilded halls of power in the grimy decks of warships with equal ease, collecting accolades and admiration. This was the era of his perceived invincibility, the time when the world saw not the cracks, but the polished, unyielding surface of the institution he represented. A legacy. A future laid out in gleaming brass and royal blue. But even then, the whispers began. Soft at first, like the rustle of silk in an empty room. Pause. The first faint notes of a symphony of ruin. The transition from naval hero to royal emissary was seamless, or so it seemed. The uniform was exchanged for bespoke suits, the rigor of command for the allure of diplomacy, his role as special representative for trade and investment, a global stage, a license to travel, to connect, to broker. The world became his oyster, a pearl awaiting his touch. It was during this period, amidst the glittering receptions and private jets, that the boundaries began to blur. The line between duty and indulgence thinned. The thirst for influence, for access, for the kind of capital that wasn't merely financial, but social, grew. He found himself in rooms where power was exchanged not just through official channels, but through whispers, through favors. He sought out the unconventional, the fast money, the shadowy figures who promised shortcuts, who offered a different kind of currency, a kind of freedom. It felt like progress, like an expansion of his influence. But it was a fatal miscalculation, a gilded trap. Each new acquaintance, each private dinner, each extended stay in a foreign estate was another thread in a web he failed to see, or chose to ignore. The air, once crisp with the scent of duty, began to thicken, to smell of something else, something metallic, something sweet. Pause. The first taste of forbidden fruit. The first taste of forbidden fruit. It was a slow poison, seeping into the grand tapestry of his life, thread by imperceptible thread. The initial whispers, dismissed as mere tabloid sensationalism, began to coalesce. Media reports, fragmented and unsettling, first linked his name to the financier Epstein. A casual acquaintance, he maintained, a brief encounter, nothing more. But the shadows lengthened. Each denial, each carefully worded statement, served only to deepen the suspicion, like a stain spreading across pristine linen. The palace machinery, so adept at managing optics, found itself grappling with a new kind of contagion. This wasn't a PR crisis. It was an infection of the soul, threatening to compromise the very essence of his legacy. His official role, once a shield, became a magnifying glass. The trips, the meetings, the private plane rides, all were re-examined through a new, cynical lens. A growing unease settled, not just over the public, but within the gilded cages of power. They saw the early cracks in the facade, felt the subtle shift in the air. This was the prelude, the quiet hum before the storm. The inventory of sins had just begun. Pause. The silence was deafening. The silence was deafening, but it was soon shattered by the cold, sharp clang of legal papers. The initial unease hardened into concrete accusation, a civil lawsuit, filed by a woman named Virginia Giuffre. Her claims were stark, brutal. 3 separate instances of sexual contact on Epstein's Island, in New York, in London. The narrative was simple yet devastating. A young woman, trafficked and abused, pointing a finger directly at a member of the royal house. The legal proceedings became a public spectacle, a morbid theater where royal decorum met the grim realities of the underworld. The palace once again rallied. Denials were issued. Lawyers deployed. But the ground beneath him was shifting. Then came the Epstein files, released into the public domain. A digital Grob of damning evidence, photographs, testimonies, documents that painted a picture far darker than any tabloid could invent. The pressure mounted, a relentless, crushing weight. Every new revelation was a nail in the coffin of his public image. The previous settlement, a desperate attempt to buy silence, now seemed like a concession, an admission by omission. The anatomy of a fall was laid bare. Pause. The truth, a bitter medicine. The truth, a bitter medicine. The digital coffin, once opened, spilled its contents with a cold finality. It was not merely the lurid photographs, those haunting stills of compromised dignity, that sealed his fate. Those images indeed showed him over a young woman in a New York mansion, a tableau of quiet horror. But the deeper rot, the true anatomy of his final fall, lay in the documents, in the inventory of his less visible sins. Confidential government files, reports from sensitive overseas missions, detailing his travels in Asia and Afghanistan. These were not the casual scribblings of a dilettante. These were state secrets. Information entrusted to a prince, then allegedly diverted, transferred, to Epstein. Between 2001 and 2011, during his tenure as a special trade representative. A cold exchange, a betrayal of office perhaps. The motive, a festering question that hung heavy in the air, thick as cigar smoke in a closed room. The full extent of this alleged transfer, the specific contents of those documents, remained a guarded secret for years. But the investigations, relentless and unforgiving, began to piece together the mosaic of compromise. Every email, every coded message, every whispered testimony from Epstein's inner circle became a nail, driven with meticulous precision. It was not just about companionship, it was about access, about leverage. The final crushing blow came not from the past, but from the present. On a winter morning, his 66th birthday, the long, slow shadow of justice finally arrived. Pause. The arrest in Sandringham for abuse of office. The palace, an ancient institution built on stone and silence, found itself in an impossible bind. Its initial reactions were predictable, measured denials, a deployment of legal architects to shore up crumbling foundations. But this scandal, a relentless tide, threatened to engulf more than just one member. It threatened the very legacy, the carefully constructed narrative of the crown. The King Charles III faced a bitter inheritance. The weight of centuries, the expectation of duty, demanded a decision. Not a political one, but an existential one. To protect the institution, a limb had to be severed. The discussions behind those thick, velvet-draped doors were not recorded for the public consumption, but their outcome spoke volumes. In late 2025, the final threads connecting him to his royal standing were cut. All titles stripped away. A public disinheritance, a symbolic exile from the gilded cage. The finality was stark. The king went further. He opened the doors not just metaphorically, but literally. All documents, all emails, every government file pertaining to Andrew's tenure as a trade envoy handed over to the police. A painful concession. A public declaration that no one, not even a prince, stood above the law. This act, unprecedented since the distant echoes of 1646, sent a chilling message. The monarchy, bruised and beleaguered, chose survival over sentiment. The cost was immense. Pause. The damage to the crown immeasurable. The damage to the crown immeasurable. For the subject, the consequences were immediate, visceral. The gilded cage, once a sanctuary, became an empty shell. The stripping of titles, completed in the final months of 2025, was merely the prologue to a deeper severance. What remained was a man suddenly bereft of the ceremonial armor that had defined his existence. Royal Lodge, for decades his primary residence, no longer offered refuge. Its ornate gates, once symbols of welcome, now barred his return. His official duties, long since curtailed, vanished entirely, leaving only the hollow echo of what had been. His name, once synonymous with privilege, now a whisper of scandal. This profound pause anatomy of fall was prelude to a darker chapter. On the 19th of February, 2026, on the 66th anniversary of his birth, the police arrived at Sandringham, not for a celebratory toast, but with a warrant. The search of his properties, from Norfolk to Berkshire, was a public desecration, an inventory of a life under scrutiny. His arrest, a cold, hard fact, sealed his exile. It was the first time in centuries such an indignity had been visited upon a member of the royal bloodline. The walls of his world, built on tradition and deference, crumbled to dust. The walls of his world, built on tradition and deference, crumbled to dust. The anatomy of his fall was now complete, yet the ghost of his past, the shadow of Jeffrey Epstein, clung to him like a shroud. The alleged transfer of confidential government documents, a decade-long betrayal of trust, painted a picture of a man willing to trade state secrets for access or influence. This grim pause inventory of sins was compounded by the chilling discovery of photographs within Epstein's files. Images of him captured over a young woman in a Manhattan mansion, a silent testament to the depravity he inhabited. The echoes of Virginia, Giuffre's claims, once settled for a sum nearing £12 million, returned with a spectral vengeance. Her book, published in the autumn of 2025, detailed intimate encounters, including on Epstein's private island, cementing a narrative of profound moral compromise. Even the unrelated scandal involving a Chinese businessman in late 2024, an accusation of espionage, added another brick to his digital tomb, proving a pattern of ill-judged associations. He became a pariah, the very air around him thick with public contempt. Stripped of title, home, and reputation, what remained was an isolated figure, a prisoner of his own making, haunted by the specters of decisions made in shadowed rooms. His inheritance, an ignominy. His legacy, a cautionary tale of privilege curdled into poison. The gilded cage now truly empty, save for the echoes of his choices.